And welcome students to our last lesson in our topic of what is a computer. Today we're going to define desktops, laptops, tablets, and smartphones. So let's start off first with the most obvious, which is that of a desktop. Our definition of a desktop is a computer that's intended for regular use at a single location. Now there is a specialized form of a desktop that's called the all-in-one that integrates pretty much all your PC internal components into the same case as your monitor. Typically with desktops, the monitor and the tower are two separate things. However, you can get all in one where it's all put into one device. Now, desktops, with the exclusion of most all-in-ones, have the ability to easily upgrade, expand, or customize the internal components of the computer. And part of the reason for this is because the spare parts and the extensions, they pretty much all have to be standardized, right? Because it doesn't matter what it is, they're pretty much all like ATX or mini ATX, for example, which typically will result in lower prices and availability. You look at something like a laptop, the other issue that you're running into is because things aren't necessarily standardized. Each laptop manufacturer will make their laptop case a certain way, or they'll have a certain style, meaning that you can't just go off and really just buy a blank laptop shell, plug pieces into it, and then say, voila, I made a computer. Most often than not, when people kind of do that, unless you're like making your own shell, most likely what's happening is that you're using an existing shell. So desktops have that flexibility. Now, additionally, desktops have the following advantages over their mobile counterparts, such as laptops, tablets, and smartphones. One of the big things is power consumption is not as critical. They're plugged directly into the wall, so they can draw wall power when they need. They don't have to convert it over. Additionally, because they have a big case, there's a lot more room or space for cooling and heat dissipation. They don't have to try and manipulate things because it's crammed into this tiny little shell, so it works out fairly well. And additionally, they have greater computational capacity, generally speaking, because a lot of the parts that are put into a mobile device, whether it's a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone, yes, it might be a really good processor, but it's pretty much a dumbed down version of the kind of processor that you would find necessarily like in a desktop. All right, next is discuss laptops. A laptop is a portable personal computer suited for mobile use. All right, it's a pretty broad definition, but the keyword here is portable. All right, unlike desktops, which are stationary. It has many of the same components that a desktop has, but it also features a pointing device known as a touchpad. That's one of the very distinct things about a laptop is the touchpad. Whereas if you compare it to a tablet, tablet is touchscreen. Now, the biggest advantages over desktops are obviously portability, because you can unplug a laptop, you can move around with it, you're not tethered to one location. You also have integration of wireless technologies such as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. That stuff pretty much comes standard on a laptop or even a tablet or smartphone. Whereas like a desktop, it's not always standard. All right, newer desktops now these days will have a wireless card as well as a LAN card built into them, but you don't always necessarily see that. Now there are several subgroups of laptops, some of which are no longer manufactured. So we're going to skip the non-manufactured ones and jump right into the ones that exist. I'm going to first talk about Chromebook, which kind of superseded one of the older categories, which was that of a netbook. So the Chromebook is a laptop or tablet running the Linux-based Chrome OS as its operating system. Now with Chromebooks, what's interesting is that they're considered pretty much the most successful Linux-based laptop today because they've become very proliferated in lots of settings. Mostly the education market has been their big success because they're very competitive with being able to have a low cost for the hardware, software and upkeep comparatively to like let's say an Apple device. Like let's say if you say, oh, I want to get a lab of MacBooks, Mac approaches MacBooks. Well, the MacBooks are going to be a lot more expensive than that necessarily the Chromebook because of all the maintenance and stuff. Even Windows-based PCs, which you can get fairly cheap for education pricing, may not necessarily be for the same price market as the Chrome OS, but they do have their own niches and they have their own advantages and stuff like that. Right. The simplicity of a Chromebook, which would normally be a drawback in other markets outside of education, has proven advantage to school districts because it can reduce training and maintenance costs. Right. Even like a Windows PC has a lot of, like, let's say, maintenance costs for things such as operating system updates. The Chrome OS is pretty seamless. It does the updates pretty easily on its own. You don't have to worry about it, changing a bunch of stuff generally. So that's a lot of the reason why. And the reason why they say it's reduced training is because a lot of it is, if you remember with Chrome, we talked about a lot of the stuff with the Chrome operating system. Everything is based in the browser. So if people can navigate with the browser, they can figure out pretty much how to use the web app. Now, the biggest drawback about Chromebooks, besides maybe their hardware capabilities, is concerns about privacy with the context of education, because they do Chrome natively will do a lot of data collection, so there's a lot of concerns about what is Google doing with this information that it's collecting on students. All right, next let's discuss an Ultrabook, which is actually an Intel-designed sub-notebook, kind of considered to be high-end. It's really to be the counterpart of the MacBook Air. So when you look at Ultrabooks and MacBook Airs, they're really pretty much the same thing. They're very similar in design and architecture. Is that if you say Ultrabook, you're specifically talking about PCs, or if you say MacBook Air, obviously you're talking about Macs. But pretty much they're the same category. Now, with this category, there's typically reduced bulk without compromising performance or battery life, as the Ultrabook will use low-power Intel cores, solid-state drives, and a unibody chassis to meet the criteria. And when I say unibody chassis, that means that pretty much the laptop is all one component. Like there's not, like the screen is integrated nice and seamlessly with the case. The keyboard is all nice and if you've ever seen them, they're super thin. Right? And how they accomplish this is they typically omit features such as optical drives and Ethernet ports. Now, currently the similar MacBook Air is the most popular device in the category, outselling the Ultrabook pretty much 2 million units for every 5,000. So you can see it's a pretty, there's like a 4-to-1 ratio. It's a pretty big chunk of how devices are sold. All right, enough of laptops. Let's get to tablets. Now, tablets are technically fully known as a tablet computer, but if we want to define it, we can define it as a one-piece mobile computer, right? Which is very simple comparatively to that laptop. We get the definitions don't mix up, but it's a one-piece mobile computer because everything that you need to do is in that. Right? You don't have necessarily a screen or a keyboard or anything like that because it's all on the tablet. And they replace that traditional keyboard and mouse with a virtual keyboard and finger or a stylus as your tracking device. Now, they're larger smartphones, and tablets are usually defined as being a tablet once they hit about 7 inches or larger. Anything beyond, you can have smartphones that really push that envelope, but typically with the tablet, 7 inches is the general rule. Now, tablets were actually conceptualized as far back as the mid-20th century. In fact, they've kind of existed in some form or another for like people who don't do things like, for example, not like your UPS or FedEx, who might have like those little things you have to sign for. Those technically were tablets. But the tablet themselves as a device would not actually become really kind of affordable nor popular until about 2010. Now, a little backstory is Windows was actually the first one to try and make a tablet for the kind of the consumer business world. It was very unsuccessful. This was back in 2002. They marketed it for businesses, but it kind of failed to find widespread usage because people didn't really see a purpose for it. It was really, at this point, it was ahead of its time. People weren't ready to make that jump. Right? Plus, It was not designed as sleek in it as it could have been. Android actually would become the first dominating tablet platform all the way back in 2009. However, the reason why we talk mostly about iPads first when we mention tablets is because many manufacturers waited until the honeycomb version of Android in 2011 to release the Android tablet. So even though the Androids were out, they didn't really become popular until 2011 because manufacturers weren't making them. Because again, people didn't think that they were necessarily a viable thing. This all changed when Apple released the iPad in 2010, which would popularize tablets into the mainstream. So again, Apple kind of leading the revolution there. Next, smartphone. All right, smartphone is a mobile phone built with a mobile operating system that has a much more advanced computing capability and connectivity than that of a feature phone. Now, with smartphones, they originally had the combined features of a personal digital assistant and a mobile phone, and later models would add functionality such as media players, compact digital cameras, pocket video cameras, and even GPS units. And modern devices now, of course, have things like high-resolution touchscreens and browsers that display both standard as well as mobile-optimized web pages. Now, 90% of the smartphone market, if you're familiar, is dominated either by Android or iPhone devices. Android leading, iPhone second. And that's going to wrap up our notes, folks. So, until the next time.